Hi everybody, my name is Kim Kreiss. I work in the Consumer and Community Research section at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. You heard my colleague BJ Bloom talk earlier this morning. I work in the same division as him, and going to talk a little bit more about kind of applied data science using R in a government setting. So my section does an annual survey every year, and I'm going to talk today about some work we've done to use R to automate some of our production processes for that survey. So just a brief kind of overview of the talk. I'll give a little bit of background on the survey, context, more on the survey data, and what we make the data look like. Then I'm going to spend the rest of the time just talking about how R fits into that, how it works, and then showing some code. So standard disclaimer, the views expressed here are mine alone, and they don't reflect the position of the Board of Governors or any of its staff. So some background. So my section runs a large annual survey called the Survey of Household Economics and Decision Making, more commonly known as SHED. So we do this survey annually, and we're a pretty large survey, so we're a nationally representative survey, and we focus on the financial lives and experiences of U.S. individuals and households. So I want to emphasize again, I'm in a consumer and community research group at the Fed, so I think a lot of people think banks, monetary policy, so we're really kind of like a people-focused group at the Fed. So our survey is really cool. We ask people a lot of different questions on a pretty big range of topics. So some kind of things we cover, economic well-being, so how are you faring financially, financial fragility, if you had some type of emergency expense, how would that affect your finances, how would that affect your well-being, and then lots of other stuff that we're really interested in people's lives, so student loans, education, how you finance education, how you feel about financing your education, income, employment, your experience with accessing credit, the banking system, and then just a bunch of stuff about housing and retirement, and also some financial literacy stuff. So you may have even heard of us. We get a lot of press coverage, in particular for our economic well-being measures. We're a really unique survey in that we provide a lot of subjective measures of economic well-being, and we also get a lot of coverage for the financial fragility piece I mentioned. So if you had emergency expenses, how you would cover them. So I want to just kind of give a snapshot of the data and highlight some of the nuances of our data and our use case. So the public use data set, which I'll be using today, has 11,316 observations and just under 400 variables. So each observation in our data set is a respondent, so that corresponds to one person. So the kind of data we get in this data set, we get a bunch of metadata on the respondent, so how long you took to take our survey, how long you spent on certain questions, et cetera. We get a bunch of demographic information on the respondents, income, education, race, geography, things like that. And then of course, we have our survey questions, and we ask a lot of questions, and they come in a lot of different formats, but kind of the two main formats we have here is we ask exclusive multiple choice questions. So think like yes or no questions. We ask you a question, we give you a list of things, we only let you choose one of those things. And then we have another type of question that's pretty common, is this select all that apply, or like grid multiple choice questions. So we ask you a question, we give you a list of things, and we tell you that you can select a bunch of options from that, or you can tell us yes or no on those options. Okay, and just to give kind of a sense of what the data look like, so here we have the case ID, so that's a unique identifier for each person, and then some of the metadata and a bunch of the rest of the data we have. Okay, and then now I'm going to talk just a little bit more about survey, what we ask, how it shows up in the data, because we have a lot of different types of questions, and then what we want to take that data and make it look like, and that's really where R comes in. So this is the question that was referenced in the Reuters article that I showed. So overall, which one of the following best describes how well you're managing financially these days? And this is one of those questions that we only let you pick one option here, right? So you can't tell us that you're both living comfortably and finding it difficult to get by. That would really confuse us. So this is what that variable is going to show up in the data like. So again, we have our case ID and then just one column for that response. And that's pretty standard, what you might expect. So we have this other question, and a lot of questions look like this. we asked people, suppose you have an emergency expense that costs $400. Based on your current financial situation, how would you pay for this expense? And this is one of those select all that apply questions. So we're really interested in how people are going to pay for this. If you're going to pay for this in a couple different ways, maybe you'll pay some of it in cash, maybe you'll borrow some of it from a friend or family member. We really want to know that. And that's going to look a little bit different in the data. So as we saw here, we have A through I. So each of these gets its own column for yes or no, whether or not you selected that box. And if you didn't select anything, it'll come up as an A, and we'll get a yes in that refuse column over at the end. Okay, so I showed you kind of what the data look like, and this is really the kind of finished product that we take that data and make it into this nice, pretty annual report. So we do this every year. In 2018, which was published this past May, our main report had 10 chapters. So it was 64 pages, 31 tables, 36 charts, which will be relevant later. And then our appendix, which was broken into 2 separate parts. So the first part is just our survey instrument, so the questions we ask, who they get fielded to, et cetera. And then the second part is tabbing out each of those questions. So we want to see what the questions look like among our whole sample. And just to kind of give a little more about what that actually looks like in the report. So we get this text, this analysis, and all throughout the report are scattered just a bunch of different types of tables and charts. So at the Fed, we're really interested in looking at a lot of different things. So we look at how within groups, and we compare across groups. So we have some different types of charts to kind of do that. So kind of a nice classic is the bar chart showing just family income distribution. This is just a crosstab, so we want to see where you're getting your income from and how that varies by different age categories. And then again, you can see down here, we'll kind of note where respondents might be in different categories here. And then this is one where we're comparing different groups. So we take people who tell us they have a stable income or they have a varying income, and then we just want to look at how willing they are to take financial risks. So different types of charts and visuals here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what our production process for this report looks like and how R fits into that. So just kind of a pretty high level explanation for our production process. So one of our first step really is we want to generate all the numbers that are going to go into the report. So we're talking about all the numbers that are in the text that I showed you, all the numbers in the tables and charts. And once we kind of have that settled, our next step is to generate the tables and charts and all the visuals for the report. And then our final step in this process is a quality control. So we really want to make sure that all our numbers are right, that we're doing everything correctly before it goes out the door. So today I'm just going to talk about all these steps are very, very data intensive and take a lot of work, but I'm just going to talk about the second step, which is generating tables and charts for the report. So it takes a lot of work to turn the raw data into analysis for the report, especially the generation of tables and charts. Like I showed you before, we have data that's not always standard across different questions and variable types, and we have a lot of data and a lot of questions, so it can be a little bit challenging. So I'm going to talk about some kind of constraints we have here. So like I said, a lot of different tables and charts. We really want to be flexible when we're setting up our analysis, and we really want to be flexible in case we decide we want to do something else last minute. Maybe we want to change something. It should be easy to do that. And finally, while we do all the data work and the analysis for this report, we don't actually go through the process of making the book and publishing it. We have a publishing department that does that. And from us, they need Excel workbooks of underlying data for each table and chart, and they also need a rendering of each table and chart. So they're going to make it into that nice format that I showed you in the report, but they need to know what it's going to look like. And they need to know beyond just an Excel workbook of that. Okay, so we use R for a lot of things. Our previous process had a lot of manual data entry, such as copy and pasting. So is anyone familiar with a software called Stata? Any economists in the room? Okay, right. So prior to using R, we used Stata, which is a great tool for using economic data, doing economic analysis. But it's not as flexible as R. What we used to do is do some tabulations, have that go into a log file, and then we would transfer that output into an Excel workbook. And you can write directly from Stata to Excel, but we still needed to do some reshaping of our data that we just couldn't do, or Stata couldn't do for us. So we needed to kind of eliminate that process or eliminate any manual kind of entry of data or copy and pasting. So we used R to do that, and we also use R to generate tables and charts for the report. So all editing needs from us is just what the charts are going to look like. We can give that to them in just a PDF. So we can use R to do that. And finally, this year, we implemented Git for version control, which was incredibly helpful for us. We had a lot of chapter files, my initials, my coworkers' initials, V1, V2. This really eliminated that and just made things much better. Okay, so if I have to convince you, our process with R is efficient. No one is spending time doing manual data entry. Our process is flexible. If we decide last minute that we want to change some type of graphic in our report before it goes out, we don't have to regenerate data in a log file, copy and paste it, do all this entry. We just change one line of code in our programs. And our process minimizes human error. Data entry is tedious. People don't like doing it. And it's prone to errors. And finally, we have Git, and Git neatly tracks our workflow and manages our file structures. So we're doing really well here. Okay, so just going to give a brief overview about how it works. So we use a couple really great packages, tidyverse, Markdown. We use Cable Extra to do some rendering of LaTeX tables. We've used a package called Question R, which is a nice package for working with survey data, and then just a bunch of other kind of great classic packages. So how it works is we go through a survey vendor, and they give us a nice, pretty clean data set. We do some of our own basic cleaning on the data, and that's kind of just to generate our own variables that we use a lot. So we ask a question about what income, or where you fall on the income distribution, as I showed you earlier. We might want to do something like group people into high income, middle income, low income, instead of using just those preset intervals. So we write custom functions that are going to take in some basic information, such as what variables we're looking at, the chart type we want to produce. So maybe we want to do just a basic bar chart. Maybe we want to do a group bar chart, something like that. And then just some parameters like titles, things like that, and then we use that to produce the figures. So for each chapter, we can create an R Markdown file that just produces a PDF of all the tables and charts in that chapter. And it's also going to produce that Excel file, which we have to send over to our editing department. Okay, and now I'm going to just walk through a quick example of what that actually looks like in practice and what some of the code looks like. So I'm going to use some tables and charts from the income chapter, and I'll show just some code for some different functions. So I'm going to just start with this really basic type graph. This is just bar chart, family income distribution. Pretty simple. Okay, so this is what our question looks like. This is one of those multiple choice questions where you can only select one of these. So we ask you which of the following categories best describes the total income that you and your partner receive from all sources, etc. So you pick one of those, and that will come up in our data kind of the way I showed you earlier. And this is where we've written some of our own programs. So we have two programs here, and the first is a read data program. So this is going to read in a clean data set, as I mentioned. So it will do all the internal cleaning that we want to have. And then it'll define some paths that everyone's going to use. So it's going to make sure that people are using the same data set. So you're not going to load in this file, and you're not going to make any edits on that data set. It's going to be the exact same data set. And you're going to be using the same paths. So it's going to go to where our output needs to go. And yeah, no flexibility there. And then finally, we just source a basic functions file that we wrote that has some custom-made functions to do this. So I want to just show what we're doing here, and this is from that question R package that I showed you earlier. The presentations earlier this morning have given me a lot of ideas for improving this. So we're just using this weighted table function. We give it the variable, the weights, and then we can pipe it into prop table and data frame, and we just get this frequency distribution. Pretty simple, and that's what we want to show in a graph. Okay, so what we do next is we just specify where it's going to be written to. So for each chapter, we're just going to have like income. If we're writing for the income chapter, it's going to be an income Excel file. We'll open a workbook. And then we have this next step, which is one of the custom functions that we wrote. So we're going to prep this data to go into the visual we showed. So the function we have for this is called prep onevar multicat. So it's just for when you have one variable that has multiple categories. So this is what the function looks like below. So it takes in a data frame, and I should specify that this data input is going to be what's loaded into your environment when you source this read data function, or read data file. Yeah, so then we have, so in the function up there, the prep one var, our input is the data input, and then the variable we're looking at. And down here, we can see that it's just using this other function we wrote called shed table, which produces the kind of output we want for our report, and I'll show that on the next slide. And it just does some basic formatting of stuff to kind of make it look nice for what we want. So yeah, this is what it looks like. So we just wanted kind of one function that people can put some variable names into and just get like a basic tabulation out for what our format's going to look like. So it takes in a data frame, either one or two variables. Depending on if it has two variables, it'll do a crosstab or not. And then our data actually comes clean with labels. So we'll use the attributes and labels to add labels to that. And then we will just return this. And finally, we have a do all function that we wrote, which combines all of these different steps in the process. As you can see, it's not as nice and pretty yet as it is in the final chapter, but this is good enough for editing. They get the idea, and we send that off to them. And, so in here we specify a chart type. So this is just one bar chart. And then we have just a function there that looks like this. And that's just going to have some basic ggplot, making a pretty simple graph. Yeah, and then some other specifications for that. So we had, the format of our data in particular can make it a little bit challenging to easily produce tables and charts for this report. Fortunately, we can use R to kind of account for that and automate a lot of the production processes for our annual survey. It still needs a little bit of work. We produced this kind of on the fly last year. I produced this mostly with the help of a PhD statistician that we had on detail in our section last year, who was amazing. And it still needs some work, but it's really, really improved our process. And eventually, the goal is to make this into a package that will be able to be used by the public, so people can pull our data, work with it, reproduce what we have, see how we did things, all that. And I want to just kind of, I guess, flag what a lot of people have been emphasizing here before I presented, especially my colleague BJ, about communicating. You really need to be able to, my boss is a PhD economist. She's been at the Fed for almost 15 years. She's used Stata. Really be able to communicate kind of the points where Stata is not working as well, and maybe we can use something else to kind of fix those bottlenecks. Yeah, so if you want to learn more about Shed, this is where we have all our information. If you want to learn more about me, you can find my personal website, my GitHub account. I'm on Twitter. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, or if you just want to email me and brainstorm some ideas about automating your job too, feel free to email me right there. And that's it. Thank you.